Hello, this is Mike Van Meter. Welcome to the Recovery is Possible, Hope and Healing with Mike and Lily podcast. We want to thank you for joining us. You can reach us at our Facebook site, which is also called Recovery is Possible, or our website, which is vanmeterwellnesssolutions.com. This podcast exists to educate the public about addiction, remove the stigma associated with addiction, and offer help and support for those suffering from addiction. Hello, everybody. This is Mike Van Meter, and this is the Recovery is Possible podcast with Mike and Lily. And Lily is not here today, but we are going to be doing an interview with Tony Crescenzo, who is the CEO of Intelligent Waves. And this is going to be an interesting conversation that is going to be helpful for all of you that are out there listening. And I'm excited to have Tony on here, and I'm going to tell you why. When I came into this field, one of the things that I noticed is somebody that is in recovery and now spend most of my time in the world of recovery. I noticed this starting with the time when I was back in the school getting this degree to do this type of work. And that was that there is a strict reliance on all the things that we've been doing over the years, whether they are successful or not. And some of the modalities are successful. And I mean, I'm sitting here today, as a matter of fact. But if you look at the long-term success rate in recovery from drugs and alcohol, pretty low. It's actually a very low number. Some, depending on the studies that you look at, some are very low, double digits. Other studies show you that it's single digits, but it's almost impossible really to get an accurate number of how many people get into long-term recovery. It's defined as more than 5 years. And the thing that surprised me when I came into the academic world on this subject is how few people discuss those numbers and how can we get those numbers up. And that's the great thing now, is the great journey for me is how do we get those numbers up and much higher? And we are going to have to find revolutionary ways to do that. We're going to have to find ways beyond talk therapy, traditional therapy. Although I'm a big fan of the 12-step process, we need more than that. But it just is amazing to me how little curiosity there is in this field to explore new ways of doing things. And I think part of it is just when you do this work day in and day out, you're saturated with just the sheer number of people that come in to work with you, and you're just kind of treading water every day, so to speak. And Tony is working in a field that has, I think, a lot of promise, and he's going to explain to us what it is that he does and how he got into it, and his programs were developed for other, in other areas of life, but may have direct application to the work that we are doing here. And so with that, it's a great honor to have Tony Crescenzo. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Thanks, Mike. It's great to be here.
Well, tell us a bit about yourself, your company, and maybe, what is it that you do, what brought you to this work? And then we'll discuss how your work can apply to what we're doing in the addiction world.
Well, that's an interesting question, and it might take a little bit of time to explain it, but when I left college, I enlisted in the United States Marine Corps and had some tough experiences many years ago as a young Marine. Yesterday was the 42nd anniversary of the bombing of Beirut. I'm a Beirut veteran. I was temporarily stationed there on and off for over a year. When I left Beirut, I was assigned to work undercover for the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, or NCIS, as people know it today. Back then it was called NIS, and had some pretty tough experiences there, working undercover for almost 2 years on a drug and fraud investigation that ended very badly, not just for the people who were convicted, but also for me. You can imagine, if anyone's familiar with the United States Marine Corps, our motto is Semper Fidelis. We're always faithful. We don't leave our dead or wounded on the battlefield. But for about 8 months, I was essentially left on the battlefield wounded. behind enemy lines by the organization that told me that they would look out for me. So if you're at all familiar with how loyalty and the Marine Corps works, that was essentially probably one of the most traumatic events of my life. When I got out of the Marine Corps, I was very lucky. I was recruited out of the Marine Corps to work in a technology company on Wall Street, and that resulted in me becoming an entrepreneur, technology entrepreneur. And I've spent the last 30 years internationally and commercially, and then about the last 20 years working in the federal space. So most of my life, I've been in and out of government service, not really realizing along the way how my service impacted me. Many people on this podcast probably know a veteran or have heard of the veteran who goes from zero to I'm going to knock you on your head in 10 seconds. You don't want to get in a car with them because if somebody cuts them off, it's on. And perhaps their second wife, because their first wife couldn't really take them too much or couldn't take them anymore. Second wife told them that they'd been in more fights since they'd been married than all the men she's ever dated combined. And that was me. Although I was a technology executive, I've been a CEO since I was 33, so it's going on 31 years now. You can cover that up in a lot of ways, but it's even hard to recognize it. You think, well, everybody else is just starting all this stuff, and it's not me. And I had an opportunity when we were working with the United States Air Force Fighter Weapons School here at Intelligent Waves. Well, we were asked to look at some cognitive human performance capabilities. And so as we looked around, I had the opportunity to be exposed to some technology that literally changed my life in 6 days. It was one of the most transformative experiences of my life. So now Intelligent Waves has developed, working with my co-founders who have, these are world famous neuroscientists, neuroacoustic audio engineers who've been doing this for 31 years, put together a program that's both cognitive enhancements for individuals, but really focusing on things like post-combat downregulation, treatment for PTSD and TBI. And as it turns out, neurologically, trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder have a lot in common with addiction. They look very similar on an EEG, for example, and the ability to treat those kinds of conditions in a non-traditional way. And I can tell you that getting treated the traditional way doesn't always work out. In the early 90s, I went to the VA. I had a VA therapist assigned, and I thought, man, this is going to be great for me. This guy's a 3-tour Vietnam veteran. He's seen much more stuff than I have. This is a guy who's going to help me. And I think it was 3 sessions in, he told me he couldn't treat me anymore because I was activating him. So we looked at what peak neuro does. I'll talk about that in just a minute. But once we understood the mechanism of action and how it worked with most kinds of addiction and trauma, we realized this was not something that should just stay with the military. So we formed a company called Peak Neuro, and Peak Neuro's mission is to take these solutions, these alternative solutions, into the commercial and international markets for anyone who has issues with sleep, anxiety, stress, trauma, or addiction.
Well, I am fascinated by this because when you're talking about traditional modalities, that's the addiction world right now. That and people are branching off into new ways. I do think that there's a group of people that understand that a lot of the traditional methods that we've been using are not that effective. And I have in the detox unit in which I work, I have patients that I personally have seen 30, 40 times. That's just me. And they've been to other facilities as well. So obviously something is not working. And many of the patients have co-occurring disorders that come in, maybe meaning, underlying pre-existing psychiatric issues, but not all of them do. But what you do see is everybody has a form of trauma along with that genetic predisposition. And we've talked about that in the podcast before, the genetic predisposition, but it's the causes and conditions, right? We have the condition which is that genetic preloading for addiction, but then there's also the cause, meaning that there's something that happens in my life where my brain starts thinking that the solution is to use a drink or a drug or one of the process addictions. And the two go together, and getting people sober long enough in order to treat the other areas that cause, that's the difficult part. Because after all, if I was to go out, and here's what's going on, Tony, I'm going to ask you about this. If I, after years of sobriety, which I have, if I was to go out tonight and start drinking, it's going to be something in my life that happens that causes me to say, you know what, a drink is my solution to this. And what the most common thing that you hear from patients is, what if my loved ones dies, then I'm going to go out and have a drink or a drug. And that's sort of the excuse to do this, because that's become sort of our coping mechanism. So let's start off, if you don't mind, with the conversation. Let's just start with, what's the key takeaway that you want our listeners, this audience here, to walk away with? And then let's kind of start breaking down why that's important. So what's the key thing that you think that we listening to you here today, what should we be walking away with, if there's one thing?
I think that's a very insightful question. I think the one thing that anyone who's listening to this should walk away with is that recovery is possible. It may not be possible in the way you're thinking, but it's possible.
That is, I love it. And I love that, because that's how we came to the name of this podcast, because it is possible. I'm a living example of how it's possible. And, Tony, before we came on the podcast here today, we talked about my background, talked about your background. And, you're talking to somebody that was a military pilot, was a city police officer, then an FBI agent, and discuss some horrible thing one human being can do to another. I've probably seen it 100 times. And I've often said that the profession I came from, if the average person was in my profession for one day, they would be in therapy for the rest of their life. But the thing is in the professions I was in, we saw that type of thing multiple times every single day for about 30 years. And then we wonder why we have the suicide rate that we have, and the alcoholism rate, and the prescription drug abuse rate that we have, family violence, and those types of things. And so these modalities that you're talking about very much apply to military and law enforcement, but also to the person that's not in that field. So can we talk about how does this work? So if I come to you and I am, I'm somebody, and let's just stick with addiction. I come to you. How does this work? How could this change my life in a way that I've probably, this is somebody that, let's say, has been going to 12-step meetings. They've been going to therapy, and it's just not working. So how does the product that you have and the modality that you're using, how does it actually work for an individual?
No, it's a great question. So let's talk about how that sort of the order of progression. Typically, when you're dealing with any kind of trauma or addiction, you're going to go to talk therapy. And psychotherapy is talk therapy. Talk therapy is about creating narrative. And when something traumatic happens to you, whether it's a negative outcome of an addiction that you have or a traumatic event that led to the addiction, what you do in psychotherapy is you essentially create meaning out of narrative. So you have this autobiography. I was born, I was raised, I went to school, I made friends, I have a life, I have a job, and then this event or multiple events happened to me. And when that happened, it really destroys your ability to make meaning of your life. And so you go to a therapist and you talk about it. Now, there are two challenges there. The first is reliving trauma. Not easy, in particular for first responders and veterans. There's another aspect to that as well, which is it's very difficult for a veteran or a first responder to talk to someone who hasn't lived that life. They don't have a frame of reference to understand. As you mentioned earlier, if anybody was in your job for one day, they'd be in therapy for the rest of their life. And that's very true of folks who've been in the military as well. So if that solution is about narrative making or narrative building and meaning making, and you go to a therapist for that, there's another dimension to it, and that, especially around addiction recovery. There was a study done several years ago, I think in 2021 by the Air Force, in both addiction and PTSD. And the hypothesis was the farther away you are from your home, the lower your chances of success in recovery. So if you go off to a month-long trauma or addiction program away from your home, you're looking at a 7 to 18% recovery rate. The closer you get to a service member or a first responder's home with treatment, actually the rate goes higher. This was a three-year RCT study. So one of the things we looked at is how do we make this available everywhere to everyone where they are and meet them where they are. So if psychotherapy is about narrative making, that's difficult. Some people have a hard time talking about their issues. Some people can't talk about it. People on the neurodivergent spectrum, for example. So what our solution does, it is a neuroacoustic brainwave entrainment technology. Now, lest you think you're being brainwashed, we don't give you thoughts. We create a frame. And by frame, what I mean by that is if you're going to go run a marathon, you need to be in the right frame of mind. If you're going to go to sleep, you need to be in the right frame of mind. Sleep is a tremendous challenge for everyone. So how this works is it essentially is a closed loop EEG-based solution at its most effective. We have built and have an application that works for 90% of the population when they use it. But what it does, when you think about narrative building and meaning making, that takes place in your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex in your brain, where your executive network and your default mode network reside. That's the front of your brain. For those who are, I know we're not on a visual podcast, for those who are trying to visualize that, if you're touching the front of your forehead, that's where narrative making, anxiety, trauma, and stress all originate. And they originate from what are called high beta and gamma waves, and asynchrony, where one side of your brain is involved in rumination. And if rumination is not a word you're familiar with, I'll give you a great example. If you've ever walked out of a room or a meeting and spent the next 6 hours thinking to yourself, why did I say that? What was I thinking? Or why did that person say that to me? And what does it mean? And you just can't get it out of your mind. That's a rumination loop. And that's literally something we can see on an EEG. What this technology does is it suppresses your brain's ability to even engage in rumination, to engage in narrative building. It suppresses the prefrontal cortex, suppresses gamma and beta waves, and opens the back of your brain. And in the back of your brain are your occipital and parietal cortexes, the anterior cingulate cortex, which imprints and regulates emotion. And emotion is a big factor in both trauma and addiction. So when we do that, what we're doing is we're suppressing your brain's ability to go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 in narrative building and creating what's called symbolic ignition, while we suppress the part of your brain that engages in emotional dysregulation. So you're capable of processing trauma and processing the origins of addiction without emotion. And so if narrative making and narrative building and meaning making is a semantic solution to your problem, that is talking about it, this is a somatic solution, a solution where your body digests trauma and deals with addiction in a way that is very different than anything else you do. Now, it is not a replacement for psychotherapy. It is an adjunct for psychotherapy. In fact, we work with EMDR therapists and trauma therapists very closely now with the solution as an additional bulwark against backsliding. So these are signals that are embedded in music, nature sounds, pink noise. And what we do is we get in a baseline EEG for a client. We look at how their brain is dysregulated, and oftentimes we'll see that it's prefrontal cortex, asynchronous alpha or beta in one part of the brain where it really needs to be more even. So think of, if you ever heard people say I'm left-brained or right-brained, think of that as the basis upon which you live your life. Your brain is this playing field. And if you're only using one half of the playing field, you're trying to get a lot of it done. You're only using half the engine to drive your car. So we have technology that enables your brain to use both hemispheres. We create very high interhemispheric synchronization. And what that does, it's the equivalent of if you're walking through the snow, you walk through 3-foot deep snow with just your shoes on, you're going to go right up to your hips. But if you put on snowshoes, you never go through the snow. Right? It supports everything. So the wider the base of the brain that's used to deal with addiction and trauma, the more regulated rather than dysregulated someone can become. And both, there's another issue to that, which is not just left and right, but whole brain coherence, where all parts of your brain, instead of fighting each other, work together. And again, these are things that we can image on an EEG, on something that's relatively inexpensive. So what we do essentially is train your brain like an engine. For the clients who come in to the wellness programs that are run by therapists, we'll get a baseline EEG. You sit for 5 minutes with your eyes open, 5 minutes with your eyes closed, and that tells us where your brain is. And then we will give you a 30-minute exercise to listen to on a set of headphones, sit back in a chair and relax. Oftentimes people either fall asleep or they just go way deep into what they would probably feel like is a deep meditative state. And you come out feeling very clear. Now, it doesn't work in one session. What we do is we look at that EEG and we'll prescribe. We have an artificial intelligence backend that contains 30 million pages of research documents, 31 years of all of the research that we've done, proprietary information, and EEGs from literally hundreds of thousands of people that allow us to look at where you are and build a protocol to help you get to where you want to be. And so what you'll do is every day for about a half hour, and at night we have something that you can listen to while you sleep. These will entrain your brainwaves into states that are much more healthy for your daily living, for your consciousness. We can downregulate those who have an inability to relax, and we can upregulate those who are suffering in some ways. Addiction and depression look somewhat similar on an EEG, for example. Long-term chronic depression has a biomarker on an EEG that's very easy to see. So what we'll do is we'll take that initial EEG, we'll give you a protocol to listen to for about 5 days, up to 2 weeks. And after that time, we'll come back and we'll take another EEG, and it's a closed-loop system. We're tuning your brain like an engine. I can tell you a quick story about a gentleman, and I'm happy to say his name because he's allowed us to do that. He's a 24-year retired naval officer, Navy SEAL, was enlisted and then became an officer, so 13 years in the SEAL teams, 21 TBIs, had an addiction problem, also a diagnosis from the VA, PTSD, sleeping 3 hours a night, but not all in a row, completely fragmented, needing multiple naps during the day. Brain fog, hard to remember things, hypervigilance in a way that was very unhealthy. Couldn't go out in a large public gathering. Didn't want to sit anywhere where he couldn't have his back to the wall. And doing this process for 2 months, we saw a huge change in not just his neurophysiological infrastructure, not just with his brain, but with his felt experience. In fact, he now has about 90% of his TBIs cleared up, his PTSD. He's taken the PCL5, which is the baseline test for PTSD, and it doesn't show. He goes out, he sleeps 6 hours a night, all in a row, and very deep sleep measured by a physiological device that we put on him. The only reason he only sleeps 6 hours is he's got an old dog, and that dog has to get up and pee in the morning. So I think he would sleep more. Now, interestingly enough, I know you're a Navy veteran, I'm a Marine Corps veteran. He, when he transitioned out of the Navy, his transition did not go well, and he wrote a book called Unsealed, and his name is Mark Green. That book is a testament to getting through a very tough transition. You know, spending time in that world as a warrior and then coming back to a civilization that you don't recognize is a tremendously difficult endeavor, especially when you lose your identity, you lose your tribe, you lose your culture, and you're in a world that you're just not familiar with. And so what I think is most interesting about that is not only did he write a book, but Amazon is creating a series called Leapfrog about his experience, and that will be coming out in I think, early spring of next year. So Mark's experience using the technology is one of the case studies that we have presented to the Defense Innovation Unit and in DoD and into the 7th, 11th Human Performance Wing at the Air Force. And we're currently working with the Air Force Fighter Weapons School, their version of Top Gun, on implementing this kind of technology. And I think the most important thing for listeners to know is it's not just about treating trauma or addiction, it's about preventing it. When we can build resilience into your cognitive infrastructure, when your brain is resilient, you don't experience trauma. And oftentimes, you served in the military, I served in the military. Boy, the drug and alcohol issues in the military are pretty severe, especially with combat veterans.
Yeah, it's actually promoted in the military quite a bit.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Promoted. It's a culture of drinking. Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I've left work and stayed drunk until 6 o'clock the next morning when the gunny's wife made us breakfast and we all went back to work again.
Yeah.
That's not a healthy lifestyle.
Not at all.
You can come to especially when you get out and you think the rest of the world works that way, and it doesn't. It's like Wile E. Coyote going off the cliff, and you just keep running until you realize there ain't no more cliff.
It's well said. It's true. That's fantastic. So now we're talking about veterans now, but for the general public that I'm working, do you have? And I know the concentration has been with the military, DoD, and you have contracts, but have you explored into the general population and working with hospitals and universities? Really interesting. So we do work with a number of colleges and universities. We're working right now with professors at Columbia University, both in the research part of this and in a study that we're beginning with some of the senior professors at Columbia, who are undertaking the technology and essentially are becoming part of the testing group for us. We ran a study in association with a university in Virginia, run by a University of Virginia professor, 6-month longitudinal study on neuroplasticity, sleep, stress, and downregulation. With, as I said, 161 participants, and what we saw was 16% increases in restorative sleep, 9% increase in the ability for folks to recognize threats before they actually became real. Neuroplasticity has gone up, and if you're not familiar with neuroplasticity, let me just give your listeners a baseline. The interesting thing about your brain and your entire neurological system is that while I can, and any of us can be grouped into cohorts, we're Mike and I are both veterans. We both live in the same area. We both are college educated. That's one cohort. But your neurology is as different as your looks. Your neurosystem is really the sum of your life's adaptation to the life that you've lived. And if you have addiction, you've adjusted your neurological system to be addicted. And there is a way to break that. Because your system and your brain is so plastic, it can be reconfigured. Almost everything about your neurological system is adaptable. So if you have a desire to do that, it can happen and you can do it. I would not tell you that there's not a lot of effort. There's always effort. But spending an hour a day, half hour a day, twice, listening to something, sitting in a chair and relaxing is a lot harder than dealing with the consequences of both trauma and addiction untreated. Yeah, very well said. And I talk about this, quite a bit on this podcast, that when you're using, I'm going to just take alcohol here, for example. You do a lot of damage to your body. Alcohol is toxic to every single cell of your body, and it's damaging your brain, obviously, but then you're changing the neural pathways, obviously, in your brain, but then you're also depleting vitamins and minerals. The B series of vitamins are not even uploaded into your body. Every single patient that comes into our unit is malnourished, and it doesn't matter, how well you eat, how well you take care of yourself, which no one does. And by the time you come to our unit, you've not been eating properly and you've not been taking care of yourself. But even if you did, it would largely be irrelevant because you're not absorbing the vitamins. And actually, alcohol will strip away many of the minerals that you have. So there's a lot of that physical damage that has to be repaired. And you have to go through a post-acute withdrawal, which lasts about a year to a year and a half, depending on, it could be up to 2 years, depending on how well you follow the protocols and taking care of yourself. But one of my theories is that first year, and there's studies that are on this too, if you can get through 2 years of not using, your chances of getting into long-term recovery, which is defined as 5 years or more, is actually quadrupled. If we can just get through that early part, because early recovery, very early recovery, is simply just allowing your body and your brain to heal. So it's critical. If we can get past that mark, that 2 year mark, we exponentially increase our ability to get into long-term recovery. So my theory is that's really the problem, is we just can't get people over that hump. Now, long-term recovery has its own challenges, and that's another discussion for another day. But in that early recovery part, it sounds like the work that you're doing is showing significant promise in helping people get over that hump. Would you agree with that?
So that's a great question and a great statement. One of the things that alcohol does to your brain is it dysregulates your ability to engage in deep sleep, restorative sleep. So not only do you have the nutritional issues, but when you think about how your body takes care of itself, every organ in your body is cleaned by your lymph system. You have lymph nodes all over your body, except your brain. There's no lymph node in your head. So how does your brain clean itself? Well, you have in your brain something called glial cells. They are the major cells that sit over the corpus callosum. And when you get deep, slow wave sleep, not dream sleep, but the deepest physically restorative sleep, which is really delta waves in your brain, when that happens, the glial cells in your brain actually shrink. And when they shrink, what happens is it pulls cerebral spinal fluid up your spinal column, over your corpus callosum, and that fluid soaks into the crevices in your brain. The deeper you sleep, the deeper it will soak into the crevices, and the longer you sleep, the farther it will go. And when you wake up and those cells expand, what does it do? It pushes the amylase plaques, broken proteins, all of the things that are involved in dysregulation. It pushes those right back down your spinal column. They go into your liver and kidneys, and that's how your brain cleans itself. So when you're addicted to, it's not just alcohol, but anything that will disrupt sleep, your body is eating itself. You are not physically able to recover every night. Now, the other side of that is REM sleep. When you're dreaming, you're not physically recovering, you're emotionally recovering. And REM sleep is very much dysregulated by alcohol in particular. When you don't get enough REM sleep, you lose the ability to imprint memory and to regulate emotion. So now you're both physically, emotionally, and intellectually handicapped. Well, when we have a program, a sleep program that you essentially put on speakers at night, and when you sleep, it pulls your body through a natural circadian rhythm. And our sleep cycles typically look like 90 minutes of deep sleep, followed by some light sleep, and then right back into REM, over and over and over again. And when you don't get that, your body consumes itself, your emotions consume themselves. So in the early stages, being able to create that artificially, that is through entrainment, until your body can get to the point where it can remember how to do it. Right? Nobody heals you in this situation. You're really healing yourself. What we're doing is giving you a scaffold to climb to get to the top of that mountain.
That is very, very fascinating stuff. Now, I know you're working with veterans, but have you tried this with people that have present to you with an addiction problem specifically?
Yes. In fact, my co-founder, Bob Holbrook, worked in addiction clinics for most of his life. And he's really the inventor of the technology and the one who taught me about how statistically difficult it is to get people over that hump for the first 6 months. He spent a lot of time in addiction clinics. And, it's kind of interesting. Folks who have addictions, one of the great things about downregulation when we suppress your neurological system is it just allows you to relax. people think, oh, I'll have a drink, it'll make me feel better, or I'll have an opioid and it'll make me feel better. But it really doesn't. It takes the pain away, but it doesn't add anything positive. And it really doesn't take the pain away. It's causing damage. So when you get the opportunity for 30 minutes or an hour to sit back and have your brain just relax, have your neurological system allow your body to regenerate and relax, your body remembers what that feels like and it craves it. So it's almost a reverse of addiction to something that's not good for you, becomes something that you desire. That feeling of equanimity is what happens when you use this kind of technology. And it becomes you're not running away from your addiction, you're running toward a much more healthy neurological and physiological baseline.
I love that, because when you are from personal experience, I can tell you, you get to the point, and if you're not an addict, this sounds counterintuitive and very difficult to understand, that when you are in the midst of your addiction, it is something that you depend on, and it's something that you're almost afraid to give up. I remember before I got sober, it got to a point, because addiction is progressive. It's primary, chronic, progressive, deadly, and it progresses over a period of time. It never gets better. It always gets worse over a period of time, and there are no exceptions. And if you're listening to this and just struggling, you are not going to be the first exception to this. Now, when you finally get to the point where it's like, okay, I have to get well because life is falling apart. You know, my family's going to leave me. I'm going to lose my job. And if you're in the DC area, I'm going to lose my clearance, on and on and on, because really nobody wants to get sober. You have to get sober. And so this is something you kind of go to kicking and screaming, and you don't want to do it. But, it's almost like you're asking somebody to have a divorce. You love the addiction, but you hate the addiction. You love the feeling, but you finally get to the point where you realize it's about ready to take everything that you hold dear. And in early recovery, you often hear people talk about their addiction almost like they're talking about a family member or a spouse, and they actually personify the addiction. After all, when you go by a wine store, it'll say wine and spirits, which I've always thought was interesting, right? A spirit is an entity. It's not an inanimate object. It's an entity in spirits. And people will talk about their drinking or drugging almost like they're talking about a person. And when you finally get sober in the early stages, you talk about it almost like you're mourning the loss of a marriage or a loved one and those types of things. And I've always found that interesting. It's very, very difficult. Like I got to give up this thing that really is helping me, and that's what we think. But it's only with time and distance that you realize, hey, that thing, it was kind of like the crazy girlfriend. She's really good looking, but she's crazy, right? So I want to be with her, but she's crazy. It's hurting me. And it's this weird dynamic. And there's this fear of letting go of that which is ultimately destroying you. And it sounds like the work that you're doing is helping to sort of suppress that and kind of reframe that. Because you mentioned EMDR, and I know EMDR has there's a lot of processing and putting thoughts in the right place where they need to be. So we have like this altered reality of what the addiction is doing to us. In a weird way, we think that our addiction is helping us when actually it's destroying us. And it sounds like the work you're doing is sort of breaking that up and putting it in the proper box, so to speak. Is that?
I think that's very true. If you think about, you've ever heard the phrase, "I need to clear my mind." This is a scaffold that allows you to get to the point where you can get clear. And a lot of people, when they talk about addiction, they talk about becoming clear, because you're not clear when you're under the influence. And to the point, even with those with high tolerance, as you develop tolerances in addictions, while it doesn't affect your you don't get as high, for example, the pleasure and as much, your body still craves it. But being able to break that chain, that addictive cycle, by inserting not a neutral feeling, but making you feel better to not be on a particular drug, or that feeling that you get when you have a drink, you can substitute that with a feeling that is a lot like it, but healthy. And you begin to crave that feeling. In fact, it's kind of interesting. You would think that they would be completely disconnected. We're talking about neuroscience here and neurophysiology. But if you do this long enough, and if you look at Mark Green's EEGs, for example, when Mark Green closes his eyes and listens to one of these exercises, his neurological footprint looks very similar to a Tibetan Buddhist monk who's been meditating for 30 years. He's in a state of equanimity. And that state of equanimity is the thing that keeps you from backsliding. It's the thing that you want to stay in. And if you do this long enough, there's a difference between what we call state level changes, which is what addictions do. They make me feel good for a half hour, and then I feel like shit for the rest of the day or the rest of the month, or for something that I did while I was under the influence. That's a state level change. It never stays, it goes away. But when you're really changing, not just treating, but changing your neurological baseline, you're creating what's known as trait level change. And your neurology can change semi-permanently. That is, I'll give you a great example. I used to sleep maybe 5 hours a night. And I would get, and in my age group, it's probably average, 18 to 22% of my total sleep was actually physically restorative. I started this program years ago as we were developing it because I had issues with PTSD. My sleep now, I think last night I got 52% restorative sleep, and I haven't listened to any of the entrainment for over 6 months. Your brain changes and you don't need it anymore. And that's really the beauty of this is you're not trading one addiction for another. You're not going to stay in psychotherapy for 5 years. You're not going to be taking an alternate drug. You're not going to be on methadone to get away from heroin. You're going to be able at some point not just to do it on your own, but to be it on your own, where your neurology is now the neurosystem, the non-dysregulated neurology of someone who is not addicted, someone who does not suffer from trauma. It's not a panacea. It's not a Band-Aid. It's a trait level change that will last for months, if not years. And the only reason I can't tell you that it's not permanent is we only invented it 3 years ago. So we only know that, and so I can never say that it lasts forever. I can only tell you that it's lasted for several to many months for me.
Well, I think what happens is when you look at early recovery, and I tell people that I work with, in the hospital and in other recovery programs I'm in, that when you first come in, you come to these kinds of situations with a lot of damage to your brain, your psyche, your psychology, your body, your physically, and that's why it's hard. That's why it's hard in the beginning, again, coming back to addiction, because you have the damage that's been done to your body and your brain, but then you also have, as you just mentioned, maybe the things that you did. Maybe you got a DUI, maybe you got a divorce, maybe you get fired from your job, relationships, maybe your kids aren't talking to you. And that what makes early recovery difficult is all of that is going on at the same time. Now, your body and your brain slowly heal if you don't continue to use. And that's part of recovery is not using. That's an important part of this. If you're not using, so we're asking you to not use that one thing that you think that is helping you get through day to day, we're asking you not to do, but you're going through a divorce, or you're having to go to court, or you might have to do some jail time, and your kids are pissed off at you, and your boss is pissed off at you, on and on and on. And we're saying, hey, but don't drink or drug over that. And that's the hump. And so in early recovery, we talk about, going to meetings, going to therapy. Maybe you have a spiritual advisor. Maybe you're using medically assisted treatment and all this kind of stuff. And I know a lot of people in early recovery, they think, but wait, I'm going to have to be on methadone or Suboxone, or I'm going to be on antabuse for the rest of my... No. These are the tools that are helping you get past that to where your own physiology then takes over and the neural pathways have reshaped, reformed, and you've gotten these vitamins and minerals that we were talking about back up to where and it gets easier. And oh, by the way, because you're not drinking, and here's one thing that if you're listening, you need to understand. If you're not drinking or drugging, your life will get better because it's impossible for it to not get better. Doesn't mean it's perfect. It just will get better. And then what you're talking about, Tony, is, something that will, this is another tool. And people say, well, I don't want to do meetings. Okay. Because I'm a religious person and I'm going to go through the church. That's fine. Well, I'm not going to go to the church. I'm not going to go to meetings. I have a therapist. Well, that's great. Or I'm going to use this tool over here. But I think one of the key takeaways to this is, and I think you would agree with this, is none of them have to be done or even should be done individually. All of these are tools that work together to bring you into that state of long-term recovery. Would you agree with that?
I absolutely agree with that. Throw the kitchen sink at it. Something's going to work. Don't serialize that is one thing after another, because the synergy of talking about it, of using the technology that we have, of speaking with a therapist, of doing whatever you need to do to get over that initial hump, that's what accelerates recovery. What stifles recovery is, I tried it for a couple of days, it didn't work, I'll just move on to something else. And then you're just on the merry-go-round of, let me find excuses to keep using.
I love that. One of the common things that I hear in particularly the detox unit, and we have so many people that come over and over and over, and I hear this, and you'll probably laugh when you hear this, but it's a daily conversation actually I have in the unit. Hey, Mike, I went to a couple of AA meetings and it's not for me. It sucked. I'm like, wait, you went to a couple of meetings and you first of all, you were still drinking when you went to the meetings and you said, this sucks. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. What? What do you mean you went to a couple? Did you get a sponsor? Yeah, I got a sponsor, but I didn't like him. So your answer was just to stop. And I think what I'm hearing from you is this is a process. You cannot do this once or twice and then make that judgment and say, this clearly doesn't work for me. That's not how that works, is it?
Well, not at all. I think you have to, don't serialize it. Don't try one thing and say, well, that didn't work, I'll try the next thing. Try several at once. I realize, most people don't like AA because they don't serve alcohol there. And that's kind of an issue for them.
I know. When I first went to AA, I thought, hey, wait a minute, this is going to be a great party. No, it's not drinking. That's an integral part of the program is not drinking. I think that's important.
Pretty much, yeah.
And I think that's the goal. But you know what? I do think that part of this is you do have to make that decision. You have to make that decision, and then you're all in. You're all in, and you're going to do whatever it takes to get well. And I know that in my own life, I utilize, 13 years later, I use a lot of different things. I use, spiritual development. I use, programs that, unconventional programs. Some things might surprise people, kind of knowing my background and my personality. They're like, you do what? Yeah, no, I think you have to have an open mind to this. And I will tell you that people coming from your background, my background, the law enforcement background, we are not people that are conditioned to being open to other people's ideas on how to do things. I mean, after all, particularly as a cop, as an FBI agent, people came to me for help. I didn't go to other people for help. And we have this idea that we can defeat anything. If it's a struggle of willpower, I will defeat you all day long. I have an immense capacity to willpower my way through things. I've demonstrated that over and over and over in my life. And you're talking about Navy SEALs and Marines and fighter pilots. I mean, those are desired traits. Those are important traits. I mean, after all, if you're an infantryman in the Marine Corps, we want an infantryman or a city police officer to believe that they can willpower their way through anything in order to survive. In a combat situation, you have to be able to believe that you are the toughest human being on planet Earth, and God help whoever goes against you. You need that. That's an important trait. But when it comes to addiction, that's a death sentence. Because the weird thing about addiction is you don't defeat it. You don't beat it. This is the one time in your life, and I want you to listen to this closely if you're listening to this podcast, the one time in your life where you're going to get victory, or this is the only area in your life likely where you're going to get victory by actually surrendering to it and just saying, I cannot beat drugs or alcohol. I cannot. I don't care how much willpower you have. You're going to have to listen to others and take advice, which is hard for a Marine to do, or a fighter pilot, or a police officer, or an agent to do, and just understand, I'm not going to beat this. I surrender to it, and I'm going to start listening to the advice of others, which I'm not used to doing, and particularly those that have had success. And I've always tell people, you find someone that has what you want, and that is long-term sobriety, and you look at their life and you go, kind of like how recovery looks on that person over there, and start taking advice from them and trying things that may make you feel uncomfortable, or you might think are silly or stupid, but just try it. We always say in recovery, just try it for a year. And at the end of that year, if you're not happy, we will be like Walmart, and we will refund your misery to you and not even ask for a receipt. That's what we'll do.
Very well said. That's one of the, I think, the great features of Peak Neuro is that it gives you that platform from which you can operate in the surrender mode, where when your mind is dysregulated, when you have anxiety, when you have rumination, when these loops of addiction that can't be broken get interrupted, and you find yourself in a place where you can be open, is the frame that I talked about earlier. Is you create a frame where someone can take a breath and listen to others and really think about what's happening. When you're in the throes of the addiction, whether that's an alcohol, drug addiction, sex addiction, adrenaline addiction, we talked about that a little earlier. But one of my coping strategies, which I wanted to be healthy, I thought it was at the time, was alpine mountaineering. I would spend a lot of time climbing some of the highest mountains in the hemisphere, primarily because I was afraid of heights. And that adrenaline rush, that dopamine that you get is a replacement for whatever else you were using artificially. And eventually you get to the point where you realize that all of those are addictions, even the addiction to adrenaline. And you have to find a place where you're not seeking an experience, but you're letting the experience find you. And quieting your mind is the best way to do that.
Oh, wow. That's very, very powerful. Very powerful. Well, Tony, I've really enjoyed the conversation. And can you tell the listeners how, if they want to get hold of you or your company and explore this a bit more, this is something that the general public can participate in, correct?
Not only can they do it, you can try it for free.
Oh,
you can go to www.peakneuro. That's one word, PeakNeuro, peakneuro.com. Right on the front screen is a Google Play Store and Apple Store download for the app. In that app are 4 different files, one for sleep, one for downregulation. If you're suffering from addiction, try Let Go. It was specifically designed for post-combat downregulation and for athletes. We work with professional sports teams and with Division I athletes. And believe it or not, losing a game can really destroy your confidence. Just ask that young Penn State quarterback. That allows you essentially to get to that clear state where you can make decisions in a much more comfortable and calm way, and not be dysregulated and not be chasing anything. It allows you to find a place of equanimity. So you can download the app and try it for nothing. If it works for you, great. If it doesn't work for you, let us know. Give us some feedback. There's a journaling feature on there. Costs absolutely nothing. For first responders and veterans, if you send us an email to studies, STUDIES @peakneuro.com, and you're interested in participating in a program, we'd be happy to help.
Wow, that's fantastic. I think I'll be reaching out to you today. Definitely. I'm fascinated by this. And if you're listening to this, I mean, this is a very, very interesting tool. And definitely reach out to Tony and his folks, because I think that this has great promise. And I'm really glad that we connected and came on, because this is very, very interesting stuff. And I'd love to have you back on the show at some point down the road, particularly after I try some of this myself. And I'd love to try it, give you some feedback, and have you back on the show so we can talk about how it worked out.
I'd be very happy to do that. I think that would be a great experience for you and for listeners to take from somebody who has the credibility that you have in this space.
All right. Any final thoughts before we close out?
Not at all. But look, wherever you are, whatever is getting in your way, don't wait. It's the best thing I can tell you. It took me 30 years to figure out that I had a problem, and I have very few regrets in my life, but one of them is that I couldn't find something like this sooner. Yeah,
I very well said. And I cannot tell you how many times I've been to 12-step meetings, and I've never heard anybody say, pick up like a 10-year chip or even a year chip and look back and go, you know what? I regret the fact that I was sober for the last year or the last 10 years. I've had plenty of people say, I really wish I had found this program years ago. It would have saved me and my family and loved ones a lot of misery. And you don't have to wait. And by the way, I actually had somebody recently that I worked with, and part of this person's, what he stated to me, his reason for staying in his addiction was he's much older. He's in his 70s, and he said, well, I'm already in my 70s. Why get sober now? Why get sober now? What does it matter? And what I say to you is you can never, there's never a bad time for this, and you can't be too old for this. Whatever amount of time you have left on planet Earth, you want it to be the best that it can be. You want to be the best that you can be, and recovery is possible. And you will never, ever, ever regret taking care of yourself, because by doing that, everybody in your orbit benefits from you getting well. Everybody does. And so, Tony, again, thanks again for coming on the show. And we'll be talking again soon. You guys take care. And again, this is Mike Van Meter, and this is the Mike and Lily Hope and Healing podcast. And we will be talking with you all soon. So as I always like to say, I do not represent any group, do not represent anyone other than myself. My only purpose in giving this information is to share with you what I've done, because it's helped me and maybe it will help you too. If I've said something that does not apply to you or you don't agree with, then just discard it. But try to take any information that you can use for yourself and help others as well. That's what we do in recovery. We help ourselves along the way, and we hope to impart the knowledge we have gained to others as well. With that, please visit our Facebook page, Recovery is Possible, and our website, VanMeterWellnessSolutions.com. Let us know how we're doing, and let us know if there's any topic that you're interested in hearing about. We'd love to hear from you, and take care, and we'll see you next time.